welcome to our fourth in our series of Bridging the Gap webinars on public sector food. It's great to see so many of you joining us. My name's Kaloran. I work at Sustain on Bridging the Gap. I'm just going to get started by running us through a bit of housekeeping. So just so you're aware, we are recording this session, which we will share with you, and we will also be sharing a summary of the webinar chat with attendees, as people have found that really useful in the past. I also want to remind you that we are a diverse and inclusive community, so please bear this in mind. We will not tolerate any kind of discrimination. Please be considerate of other people's points of view and avoid using offensive language or inappropriate cultural references. We're really looking forward to having an event where everyone feels safe and respected. If you have any concerns, don't hesitate to get in touch with me, Hannah, or any of my Sustain colleagues. This has been a really popular event. So we have currently got 71 people here in the room, and there's going to be more joining us over the next few minutes. So while I introduce Bridging the Gap, it would be great if you could put into the chat your name, location, and if you're representing an organization and why you're here today. And just so you know, we're in webinar format. So there's a chat and there's also a Q&A box. And it would be amazing if you have any questions at any point that you want the speakers to answer, please put them in the Q&A box. So what do we mean when we say bridging the gap? There are two unfolding crises affecting us today, an inequality crisis and a climate crisis. Yet food that is good for people and the planet is currently more expensive than food that is bad for health and produced in ways that damages the planet. And we want to change that by bridging the gap between people experiencing low income and affordable climate-friendly food, because everyone should have the right to enjoy a healthy, just and sustainable food system. So Bridging the Gap is exploring the most effective policy interventions and financial mechanisms to make climate and nature-friendly food accessible for all. There isn't one silver bullet. It will take a raft of policy changes to effectively bridge the gap. We have prioritized 6 focus areas, which will be familiar to many of you, and therefore there are years of advocacy and campaigning behind them. And among them is the opportunity presented by public sector food. Over the next 2 years, we are piloting interventions that bridge the gap across the 4 nations, and these pilots will demonstrate the change we need to see and build a strong case for advocacy in the future. So I'm going to hand over to our chair for the webinar, my Sustain colleague, Ruth Westcott. Ruth manages Sustain's work on the climate and nature emergency, working to make food a central part of policies to tackle the climate and nature emergency at a local and national level. Over to you.
Much. Love that. What a great introduction. Thank you, Kaloran. Thanks for inviting me here. And thanks everybody for joining us to talk about the what I think is one of the most exciting parts of the food system. Often people sort of glaze over when I start talking about procurement standards, but there's so many people in this webinar that I'm never going to apologise for being a procurement specialist or enthusiasm fast again. I've been working on procurement for about more than 10 years now. Firstly, getting sustainable fish standards on the London 2012 Olympic menus, which sounds so long ago now. But yeah, sustainable fish standards were one of the first big successes of our work in procurement at Sustain when we were running something called Good Food on the Public Plate. So I've got a long history of working on public sector food. On the one hand, it feels like the more I do and the more I work on this, the less I actually understand. So hopefully today is going to actually help to break down some of that and look at what we can actually do as solutions. This webinar is incredibly timely for a few reasons. Firstly, in England, Will Quince, MP, has just announced a review on procurement standards, and that's going to be happening. We had a meeting about it last week, and that review is going to be happening over the next couple of months. In Scotland, a consultation has just finished on aspects of the Good Food Nation Bill, which included some bits on procurement. And we know that Wales are looking at routes to support farmers as they consult on their new farm support schemes, which saw farmers protesting outside the Senedd just a few weeks ago. So this is an incredibly live and important topic as we approach the next general election. The most important flagship policy, probably, as you may or may not be aware, is the government's commitment to a 50% local and sustainable in public sector food. And the Labour Party have also backed that commitment. So if they get in power, they will be bringing in standards, or they've promised to bring in standards to buy at least 50% of public sector food from local and sustainable sources. So that's the background. Public sector food is on the political agenda, and it certainly will be. It's in manifestos, and it's certainly going to be part of the discussion over the next 6 to 12 months. I actually got a meeting in this week with some consultants that are undertaking the review on behalf of Will Quinn. So literally this week, I will be taking what we hear here today to put in front of those consultants to try to influence the review that Will Quinn is undertaking, more of which later. I might be asking you to drop good examples and case studies into the chat, and I'll take them along. I'll do my best to get those in front of this review. So as I've said, can feel complicated, can feel technical. And I hear a lot about how difficult public sector food is, how difficult the standards are to put in place, and how many challenges there are in getting good food on the public plate. But I know from my work that great public sector food is possible, it's achievable, it's happening across the country. And I'm delighted today that we can focus on solutions. I'm really excited to hear what our panelists have got to talk about, and I hope that we can have a really productive discussion. I'd encourage you to get involved. We'll hear from the panelists, and then I'll ask a few questions, and then we're moving to questions from the floor. So please be thinking about questions as we're going along, and make sure you've got a few either in the chat, actually in the questions, don't put them in the chat as I might lose them, and we'll come to those later. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker for today. We have first Ander Zabala, who works at the London Borough of Hackney and is the Sustainability and Climate Manager. Ander is leading on the consumption-based emissions theme in Hackney's Climate Action Plan, which includes sustainable food diets. Ander is aiming to get boroughs to join the Eat Like a Londoner campaign and the London Food Purchasing Commitment to encourage more plant-based meals across catering contracts, whether it's schools, children's centres or canteens. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Ander, over to you.
Thank you, Ruth. I swapped my iPad, so you will need to present on my behalf. You can hear me, that's fine, yeah?
We can hear you great. Right,
okay.
Let's get your slides up. Can you help us, Hannah? Brilliant, thank you. So you'll just have to do the next slide, please, like back in the days of the COVID announcements, if that's all right. Thank you.
There you go, thank you. Right, so I'm Ander Zabala. I've been given a strict 6 minutes, so I will just be going through it. I'm Sustainability and Climate Manager for Hackney, but like I mentioned, Ruth said, I also have got a hat on the food emissions lead for London councils and London boroughs. Next slide, please. Right, so I want Europe, and I say Europe because I want boroughs to really empower, to be encouraged to use the power to get a procurement empowering leverage that they have. So when I use the slides, it's for them to use that food buying power to deliver on the climate goals. There's three things: increase plant-based consumption, reduce food waste, and championing local sustainable food producers and growers. Next slide. I'm coming with a climate angle. So I don't work in public health, or I don't work on policy strategies. I work on the poverty reduction, but we work together. But my main objective is here to reduce emissions. So 2 years ago, we have no coordinated approach to tackle food emissions. Yes, we had climate emergencies, but we did not have ambitions on food emissions, and we did not have a single target on food emissions. Next slide. However, fast forward 2 years now, we have got a coordinated approach to tackle food emissions, and we have the common emissions, and we've got food targets on food emissions as well. Next slide, please. So the key, I mean, there's a lot of research and data, I can't share that today, but the main thing is that sustainable food is mentioned in climate action plans. However, we're talking about downstream life cycle when we're talking about food waste recycling. I work in recycling and waste. That was my whole 19 years in Hackney. But now we're looking at the upstream, which will have the biggest impact of carbon emissions, and procurement is very key to instigate that market change. Next slide, please. So we had workshops, we worked through loads of online and workshops back then, two years ago. We came out with 2 actions. Eat like a Londoner. This is a resident-facing public to encourage them to eat more plant-based and reduce food waste, and the London Food Processing Commitment, which I'll be focusing today. Next slide. There's 3 targets, the same as what I mentioned before. We have got 4 boroughs signed up. These are the pioneering boroughs that have said, yes, let's do something together. If you live in London and your borough is not there, can you just give them a nudge to your borough, see whether they would like to join the VIP room with Hackney, Howell, Lambeth and Newham. Next slide. So from planning to signing, it took about 4 months. However, the first, I will say maybe the 3 months, it took about more desk-based research, talking internally, aligning policies and strategies, and putting a case together, and doing a catering contract mapping of what we had available in terms of how much food do we serve in the council. Next slide. And you will see, yeah. So there you can see that is literally like the governance for Hackney is now not environmental, but the climate program board. I went to the CLT corporate leadership team, which is the chief exec, and then once we have that, we have the mayor signed up. This was very key because it gave me the leverage to go to every single catering contractor we have in the council to say, hey, you need to increase more plant-based. Now is what the mayor wants. So that helped us. Next slide. There's 3 targets. One is reducing food emissions. This is based on planetary health diet. We need to reduce the amount of meat that we have, that we eat, but it does contain meat in the plate. It does say that we need to eat more legumes. We need to make more beans more acceptable and more fashionable, I guess, because that is been a reduction on the amount of legumes that we eat. Next slide. Then target number 2, we have called it saving food waste. I won't go into too much detail, but yeah, obviously there's no point saving food, recycling it if we could actually give it away to surplus. Next slide. The 3rd target is improving food provenance. So this one, we didn't make it compulsory, but we did make compulsory to make it to measure how much ingredient, what food is coming from equitable, sustainable, and agroecological sources. We want to understand what is that we're serving, and then aim to increase to 30% by 2030. And yeah, so encourage catering companies to source ingredients from places such as better food traders. Next slide. And in Hackney alone, just you can see the amount of money you can spend in contracts. On the first 10 months, we have managed to gain to the contract certification of children's centres, council training centres, and internal events. And that just shows within one borough, we got 30, and then times it by 400 local authorities, how much money we're spending, and we can influence that. Next slide. In here, I haven't been involved, but there's been a great partnership to sustain better food traders and growing communities to offer 100% organic food at 2 primary schools. Next slide. And we don't have a procurement the schools do the procurement themselves for the schools meals, but we have set up a framework, and we are incorporating different nudges into the school menus, such as offering parents student tasting days or removing processed meat from next slide. So I think I have to present it to have a case study to actually show what impact it has to actually reduce the amount of meat and fish that we have. We had the Hackney Mayor's team coming along and asking us practically, how can we reduce our food emissions for our meals? We had 200 people. We were serving 75% meat and fish and 25% vegan and veggie. And in 2023, they went 50-50. And that alone reduced food emissions by 55%. So that was a huge amount. And this year, if you just click next, this year we actually they're going the other way around. So now they all are going to be offering 75% veggie and 25% meat and fish. So we haven't worked out emissions, but it'll be substantial from 2 years ago. Next slide, please. I think. Yeah, so the reflections, internally to get it approved, it's important not to demonize meat. I wish everyone was vegan, it will make my life easier, but that's not how politics works. We need to work with a negotiation, and we need to ensure that we are asking for less but better meat. There are cost savings when we're looking at increasing plant-based and veggie meals, or not increase costs at least. Public health is critical support for us to enable that. But we also have got 6 years to incorporate all these changes within the council. So that gives an implementation roadmap, which makes it achievable. And it should be the last slide. Which is, yeah, thanks for that. And let's just make beans cool again, please.
Thank you so much. Andrew, that was brilliant. It's an absolute inspiration what you're doing in Hackney. Thank you so much for sharing that with the group. Right, questions for Andy. Keep them coming in the Q&A, and feel free to comment in the chat. Right, I'm going to move over to our next speaker now, so that we can come back to you with questions, Andy, later on. Okay, our next speaker is Edward Morgan, Castell Howell Food Group Corporate Social Responsibility and Training Manager. So a bit more about Edward. Born and raised on a farm in West Wales, Edward's career Edward's career has been exclusively in the food sector. Edward leads Castell Howell's food supply chain projects, focusing on sustainability and measuring their impact across the supply chain. Public sector catering is approximately 22% of Castell Howell's total sales, supplying all NHS Wales hospitals, many in England, and 1,000 schools across Wales, helping to provide ingredients for an estimated 600,000 school meals weekly. So the floor is yours, Edward. Over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Ruth. Well, Prynawn da from glorious West Wales here. Hope you're all well. Great to hear the presentation earlier, and I haven't got any slides, I'm afraid, but I'm very competent in speaking for 6 or 7 minutes. So you'll have to kind of reel me in a little bit, Ruth, if I overextend my time. Yeah, I'll thank you for the overview here. And we're a food wholesale and manufacturer, and our roots are in agriculture. And I guess it's fair to say we've recognized the need that we need to restructure our supply chains. There are many risks in the food supply chain. And I guess when we have a look at our vegetable supply chain, we import, as a company, we import some 3,500 to 4,000 tons of frozen vegetables from the Netherlands every year. Now, there's some issues there. The environmental footprint of some of the farming methods in Netherlands, but it's also we're not delivering any social value to continental Europe. Well, none that we can't measure the social value. So we're looking to onshore as much veg production as we can to Wales and the UK. And you mentioned there we supply 1,000 schools. We were introduced to Food Sense Wales quite a few years ago, and I think Katie and Amber would be on the call. So if you want to restructure supply chains and indigenous supply chains to meet the 50% target, which you mentioned earlier, then we've got to start now. That's not going to change overnight. And especially here in Wales, if we were exclusively produce that is supplied now onto the public sector plate, it's pretty limited, sort of red meats, certain types of vegetables. It doesn't give the diversity we need for children. And arguably, perhaps struggle a little bit on the nutritionals as well. So a couple of years ago, a conversation with Katie and Amber and Sarah from Tyfu Cymru to see what we could do. And we needed to start something and learn from those experiences. So started off in 2021, which has evolved in the past couple of years, 2022, I beg your pardon, to what's been kind of labelled as the Courgette Project. So our aspirations weren't that high initially. So we worked with a local grower outside Cardiff, and we collected the courgettes, delivered them to schools in Cardiff on a programme called the Summer Food and Fun Initiative, and worked with the nutrition team, with Food Sense Wales, with Cardiff Council, just to test that supply chain and have a real feel of what we need to do to work with, I guess, smaller scale indigenous Welsh growers. So that went really well, and the report, which was published, demonstrated how much scale and how much scope we have to kind of evolve that in Wales. And it's great to be a part of this and be one of the 3 projects which have been identified by yourselves as, I guess, transformative projects. So, and it gives us a little bit of confidence looking to the future as well, that it kind of underlines that we are doing the right thing. But to achieve our goals, it's got to be collaborative. So we need to get the farmers on board, we need to get our customers, and then us in the supply chain making things happen, the logistics behind it. Because what we want to do is to see what, I guess, that kind of say, what does good look like? What would the supply chain look like? So started off that the veg is grown towards organic standards, or growers who are moving towards those standards. We're looking at kind of shorter supply chains, but short and very efficient supply chains. So that's very important. We've got to take out a lot of cost out of the sector, because the veg is going to be more expensive, but we need to be as efficient as we can, not to make it too expensive. And thirdly, then, is the nutritional values. So that is kind of critical, working with the dietetic team, the nutritional team, to make sure that it adheres to all the standards that is expected of the supply chain. It's been great, really. It's been a journey of discovery, and I think if we go in the mantra, you've got to give something a go just to see what falls out. And what we've kind of established in a very short space of time is a lot of buy-in from the local authority caterers. We started off with 1 local authority. This year we're up to 5 local authorities, which has got a reasonable geographical spread across South Wales. We started off with 1 supplier. This year we're up to 7, 8 suppliers, 8 growers, and they're based from Pembrokeshire all the way across the M4 corridor into Powys and down to Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan. So we've got a nice kind of geographical spread, which kind of mitigates risk a little bit. The weather patterns are changing. It could be very wet in West Wales, and it could be very dry in East Wales, and likewise it could be very wet in Wales or very dry in Wales, and very dry or wet in the east of England. So we realise we've got to take that kind of slightly more local approach. The logistics work through our lorries. We liaise with the growers through the extended team we have, Food Sense Wales, Farming Connect that I mentioned earlier. So we're looking towards yields and harvest. So we need to really focus in on what's going to be available and roughly when. That is, of course, changeable. But likewise, does that align with the school menus? So, and that's kind of where the challenge lies, really, is to align harvest so we can get it off the fields as close as possible to the time that it hits the schools. Now,
we're at 6 minutes.
We're up to 6 minutes.
I'm loving it. But if you could just move to the wrap up, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah,
but remember, it will come back if we've got time later.
Yeah, certainly. So what we need to do, there's a lot of investment. We need to invest in agri-tech, but I guess taking the risk out of that supply chain. And we really look forward to seeing how this evolves, because it's without doubt, it's going to be of critical significance when it comes to food security, food sovereignty, and managing environmental and social risks across that supply chain. They are great. Thank you, Ruth.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you for keeping the time. All right. Next up, and our third speaker is Sarah Gowanlock, who is the Soil Association Food for Life Scotland Partnerships Manager. Sarah is a partnership manager with Food for Life Scotland, a Soil Association programme funded by Scottish Government. Through her role, Sarah builds and maintains supportive partnerships across the food system sector in Scotland, working closely with strategic stakeholders to embed the Food for Life approach, wherever possible to drive positive change. Sarah has worked as part of the Food for Life Scotland team since 2018, which supports local authorities and other public sector settings to achieve the Food for Life Served Here award, a catering framework for serving fresh, local and sustainable meals. Can't wait to hear from you, Sarah. Take it away. Thanks, Ruth, and thank you for the invitation today. I'm really excited to speak to you all, and it's been great listening to the other speakers and learning from them. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of interesting questions coming up as well. So I want to kind of give a little bit of background about Food for Life Scotland, give a little bit of context into how public procurement works in school meals, specifically in Scotland. But I'm really conscious there's a lot of expertise of people on the call as well. And third, I'll give an example of a project we're currently working on, thanks to Bridging the Gap, and we'll kind of give a little bit of insight on that. Hopefully all in 6 minutes, but we shall see. Do rein me in if necessary. So as we said in the introduction there, Food for Life Scotland is a soil association programme funded by Scottish Government, and Food for Life served here is a UK-wide certification scheme that provides a framework for that fresh, local and sustainable meals. So our team here in Scotland were funded to give bespoke support in achieving that certification. That includes supply chain support, data analysis support, menu development, and staff training. So we're involved in lots of different aspects of that. The scheme itself is at bronze, silver, or gold levels. It looks holistically at many of the aspects of the service, such as preparing dishes from scratch with unprocessed ingredients, incorporating seasonal produce, and providing customers with information, in this case, pupils, with information about where their food is coming from or food provenance. Several of these standards interact with procurement. So, for example, the animal welfare scheme, so there's a minimum UK animal welfare assurance that is applied to the meat products, and fish as well, with MSC and MCS and not having the fish to avoid list. And then at silver and gold as well, there's an organic produce requirement as well. So at Soil Association, we believe that everyone should have access to food that is good for people, good for the planet, good for our local economy, and public procurement is a great way to do that. Public procurement in Scotland so the public sector in Scotland spends £150 million annually on food and drink, which is likely obviously to rise with inflation. So we've, in Food for Life Scotland, have worked traditionally on that school meals service, so I'm going to focus on that just now, but there are other, other aspects of the public sector and how they work public procurement as well. And so in Scotland, for schools, they're catered by the local authority under either a facilities management or an education department, and the menus and the staffing are organised centrally, therefore, by the local authority, rather than in individual schools or trusts. Some local authorities manage their own procurement entirely. However, Scotland Excel provides procurement services to many local authorities and have frameworks for fresh butcher meat, grocery, dairy, fruit and veg, frozen products, and bakery, bread and bakery products. These frameworks can be broken up into geographical lots. They're often for multiple years, and they may have an extension of that contract. So it could be a 2-year plus a 2-year extension of the contract. There's lots of different areas of policy that are touching upon public procurement in Scotland. Ruth, you mentioned Good Food Nation. That consultation closed yesterday for the national plan. There will then be local plans that have regard to the national plan once that's finished. So there's quite a lot happening within the Good Food Nation space that will touch upon public procurement. There's also Catering for Change, which Ruth, you mentioned 2012. We can go back to 2011 with Catering for Change, which is kind of a sustainable buying practices. That's something that could be refreshed. And then there was the Procurement Scotland Act back in 2014. And then there's other aspects around community benefit within those contracts, and how local authorities can use those to best effect. So that's a really whistle-stop tour. Sorry, if I'm seeing in the chat here, I will bring this closer to me. Is that better for people? Great, perfect. You could just see my face just slightly bigger. So I wanted to talk about an example that's live at the moment of procuring organic food with a program or a pilot that we're calling Give Peas a Chance, which is funded by Bridging the Gap. So we're always looking for opportunities to bring in more organic products into school meals and the public sector. My colleague, Lucy Wardle, who's our supply chain development manager, was lucky enough to meet a producer, Bill Swire, at an event several years ago. And he was really passionate about serving into schools
He has a farm in Aberdeenshire that, among other things, produces split peas. And these peas, some of them were going into human consumption, some of them were going into animal feed. They were already doing a load of good on his farm as part of his organic crop rotation. They were fixing nitrogen into the soil, reducing that need for artificial nitrogen inputs. But Phil thought they could do more, and his dream was really to have them as part of a nutritious school lunch. So we were really pleased to have the funding from Bridging the Gap with our partners, which are Aberdeen City Council Catering and Procurement Teams, RET, which is the Royal Highland Education Trust, and RNCI, which is the Royal Northern Countryside Initiative. So we're having a 12-month project to open up a new route to market for these local, organic, nutritious, and climate-friendly plant protein in the split peas. So we're really going to bring this to life with educational activities for the pupils to engage them on changes in their school menu and the environmental, social, and health benefits of those peas. So I feel, Edward, that we're kind of at the beginning stages where you were previously, kind of looking at this singular product and what we can do with it in that school sector. So I'm conscious of time, but I do have a couple of learnings that I can bring out really quickly already, even though we're at the very early stages of this project. And the first is, it might sound trite, but partnership working, having everyone involved from the beginning, breaking down any perceived barriers between different organizations, different groups of people. That's been a really fantastic part of the project. And hopefully, we'll continue. The procurement team was involved very early on from the council, and they really see the potential, they see the impact, and they work with us really well. So do involve procurement colleagues. And another learning we had was a barrier around processing, and that in-between part of the supply chain, we were able to really unlock a lot of different aspects locally, but the processing proved to be something that we had to go further afield for. So just being aware of that part of the supply chain as well. And then the last learning being around, this was a product that was already being grown, and the importance of choosing the right product for the right market. So this is something that was being grown, so we didn't have additional risk in terms of harvests. It was something that, we're creating that human consumption market and trying to build that demand for. But it's already ambient. We were able to bag it in a way that was suitable for the schools. We were able to, really not take up too much storage with them. And, they were already helping on the nutrition aspects of the menu and everything like that. So I think right product for the right market. So I could go on, 6 minutes. Conscious of time.
We are at 6 minutes, Sarah. Thank you. I detected that you just slowed down a little bit, and I got in there with a time count. So thank you. Really, really interesting. Thanks to all the speakers. I've got about 1 million questions, and thanks for the ones that are coming in on the Q&A. I wanted to start with a question about cost. Like, what's absolutely core to Bridging the Gap is that we're trying to find solutions that will make agroecological food accessible to those on low incomes. So it's about the price. It's about how we make good food accessible and affordable to people on low incomes. So is there anything that you'd like to say particularly about cost, either how you've managed to deliver cost neutral changes, or where you've managed to find solutions to be able to make, or if you haven't, then advice about what is really needed to unlock those changes? Would anybody like to take that question first?
Yeah, can I dive in first?
Oh, you're breaking up for me, Ed. Is everybody else, is it my internet, or is
that okay?
Actually, I can hear you. You've frozen, but I can hear you. So go for it. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, right. Okay. Yeah, I'm not too sure what's happening.
Oh, could you try turning your camera off, Ed, and just see if we can hear you?
Yeah. As I kind of introduced frozen veg for it. Okay, is that better?
Yeah, better. Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah, we can hear you better actually with no camera.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, right. So as I introduced in a little bit earlier, we when you look in, if you're looking at just a clear-cut price comparison, it's going to be very difficult to get down to the prices of the produce that we buy in frozen. But when we looked last year against we buy fresh veg as well. But when we did comparisons against what we were paying for the organic produce against the conventional fresh market, then it wasn't too bad. There wasn't too much of a gap. But I guess what we need to be really wary of, the most expensive foods is the food you can't get. So I think if we look at it take a slightly different view to say we've got to invest now and do things a little bit differently. Otherwise, price is immaterial if you can't get it. And we're already seeing stresses in our supply chains, and that's gonna gain momentum over the next couple of years without doubt. So it is trying to find that balance between cost and value. But on saying that, we do need to work with our indigenous suppliers and try and introduce them to methods which will help them. I'm not saying be more efficient, but probably more productive for them as well. Because if we're trying to attract a broader range of farmers into horticulture, you've got to sell a bit of a story. You don't want to say you're going to be always out picking cauliflowers in the cold and the rain, etc. So we need some options there, which is why I mentioned in the chat, we're working with people such as AMRC Cymru. They're based up in North Wales. They're a division of Sheffield University, and looking at all kinds of things on robotic tractors, drones, weather stations, which are really, really localized, to try and bring in as much technology as we can to give us every chance of delivering what our customers need.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks. Sarah or Ando, would you like to come in on the cost point, how you've avoided it, what's really needed?
So I've been focusing more on increasing plant-based versus improving the food provenance. So I don't have that direct experience yet with that one, which is one of the key ones that I would like it to be more mandatory, to be able to report how much public sector actually records the amount of food provenance that we have. We don't know, so we're walking a bit blinded here. And we, through the London Food Purchasing Commitment, that's what the first step is, to actually do the baselining, how much of it is. Perhaps once you have a number, that might encourage others to increase it. But at that point, I can't really answer you whether improving the food provenance would actually cost more. The original, even the previous mayor for Hackney, he was saying, if we reduce meat, then supposedly you should be able to make those savings to pay for better food. That was always his selling point for the food purchase commitment. He was an advocate of this one. And just going back to my interview meetings with the school managers, they were saying they were already reducing the cost, removing some meat and increasing the amount of vegetables in there. They were already doing that because it was more cost effective for them. However, I don't know whether they were specifically talking about organic food. That's one to watch for us.
Great, thank you. Anything you'd like to add, Sarah, on that one?
Yeah, I want to echo what Edward said about the cost of the future food, and I think we affordability is a complex factor, and thinking within the wider context of where we are, we're seeing local authority budgets and public sector budgets really being squeezed at the moment, and catering has been an area that has repeatedly seen cuts to their budgets, and I think it's about the value that we put on good food, and the myriad of returns that we get from putting that value into food, whether that be around health, whether that be supporting our local producers and suppliers, or around the environment and the biodiversity that you can get from purchasing organic, and other aspects here when we're looking at agroecological and organic in particular, and also looking at more sustainable production models as well. So yeah, it's a complex issue. There's a lot of different factors involved, but it needs to be about how we value that food going forward.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks. Great answers. And before we move on to questions from the floor, my second one is, given that we're in an election year and we've got the opportunity to be putting pressure now and, you know, advocating for change at a national level, if you were in charge, if you were the Prime Minister and we elected you, what would you do in your first 100 days to support public sector procurement? Anyone want to take that one?
I can go first and just say keeping devolution all since we're in Scotland, but keeping devolution all in mind. But one of the things that Soil Association has called for is around a public procurement target for organic food purchasing and using that as a lever. We've had a 15% target for organic food in public procurement, recognizing that that is really ambitious and really far from where we are at the moment. But that's one of the levers that we can use in order to, increase that sustainable production in the UK. So that would be one thing.
Well, 15%. I mean, there are schools, plenty of schools in France and the Netherlands and Denmark and that are running at 40 or 50% organic. So Italy, it's just normal. I don't think 50% is organic. I think is ambitious. I think it should be the baseline. Anyone else on that one?
Okay, I'll dive in, Ruth. I think in my first 100 days, I would employ somebody like Professor Tim Lang or somebody similar as my special advisor, and I'd really sit down and listen to him and other people, some of the people on this call as well. So I think the first thing I would do, well, I guess if it was us, we're kind of in the food sector anyway, but let's say if it wasn't in the food sector, is kind of sit down and listen and try and really understand on food sovereignty and what it means for our national security, and have a conversation with your, the NHS trust, and really understand the crippling costs of diet-related illnesses on the NHS and consequently the taxpayer. It's quite an easy connection to make. It really is. So I think within the first 100 days, I'd set up that task force, get people from the food sector and the health sector, and say, this is my priority, the health of the nation and delivering value for the taxpayer.
Yeah,
simple
absolutely.
as that.
Thank you. Thanks. Would you like to add anything, Ander?
Yes, I would not want to have their job, but if I did, I think so. I mentioned my background is waste and recycling. We have got recycling targets, and that has literally moved the whole system on the waste and the recycling infrastructure, the supply chain. It's really just like made it that kind of focus. And there's a league table we get scrutinized. I will just, obviously we'll have to define it, but you could have the climate friendly provisions from councils, have that, how much of it is organic, how much vegetables they're offering, what was the legumes, where they're coming from. So I will set up kind of a national indicator for climate friendly provisions. The second one will be tax UPF, and be able to. So we'll have to be careful, obviously, because a lot of UPFs are eaten by those that can't afford actually proper food. So we'll have to have some kind of subsidized for others that can afford it. And the third one, because it's all about politics, we need to make beans cool again.
Absolutely, yeah. Great. So moving to the questions in the chat then. These have been absolutely brilliant. Keep them coming in. Certainly better than my questions. The top upvoted one is from Diana about the business case. And you put together an absolutely brilliant business case. I know you've offered to share it. Would you like to just talk through maybe the 3 things that you found were the most helpful when you were making the business case that the council needed to hear? Or like what really nailed it for you getting the commitment over the line in Hackney?
I think comes from that political support. The key thing is that, and I said it as a reflection, is that as soon as you start talking about increasing plant-based, they think that we're talking about society or world thanks to social media, or not thanks to social media. But I think really focusing that we're not talking about going 100% plant-based. In contrast, we're actually just saying improving the food provenance. A lot of behavior change that we are getting from residents is, if you talk about taste and texture, you will get more of an uptake. And they start ignoring the word vegan and meat-free days. So in order to get a buy-in, was the cost saving, and that you're not asking them to go vegan. Don't even use the word vegan, because I feel like it becomes a war between politics. And I will say a lot of elected members, they just react very quickly. It's more like they live in a Twitter world. So just be mindful of the language that you're using, and it's about the taste and healthy aspect of it. But the cost saving is, if you improving the food provenance, you probably are also removing meat. So you just need to be careful about that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Great answer. The next most upvoted question is from Cyan, or it might be a different spelling of Sean. Apologies for my terrible pronunciation. This is about how you can engage students in the changes that you make on school lunches. So I think Anders' point was really good there about the language that you use and talking about taste and using that as a way to engage students and parents. Is there anything that anybody would add to that about how you've managed to get the split peas eaten? Like, how have you managed to overcome any challenges around that and avoid food waste?
Yeah, so I mean, it's live at the moment. So we're learning through this process. And part of that is being really responsive to listening to the cooks who are on the ground. What are they seeing? What's being wasted? And we have quite a few recipes that are going to be started in the schools being served now. So we're going to be learning kind of for the next couple of months what actually works. So we had a recipe development day with the caterers in Aberdeen City Council, and it was an absolutely brilliant day in which they really were able to flex their creative muscles, think about what they're cooking for pupils every day. They know what gets eaten in their schools and what's going to be an acceptable, palatability, taste that they're going to like, different ages, how they're going to react to those. So they came up with a bunch of different recipes, and now we're basically seeing how they go down in the different menus. And I think part of this is about being willing to try new things, and thinking that our pupils can try new tastes. We've mixed as well between things that are kind of not visibly peas and things that are visibly peas. So we'll probably learn through this process what how each of those are going down. And then we were really pleased to get the funding, because it will allow us to do these educational activities that I talked about. So they'll include classroom visits. It will include being able to evaluate these dishes more intensely than we otherwise would be able to do. And those classroom visits are being done by RNCI. And so they're actually going to have the opportunity to go in, speak to the pupils, say, have you noticed these changes on your menu? And these are what the peas actually look like when they're growing, do different growing projects in the classroom, really bring that to life for them. Because there's such a great backstory to these peas. They are coming from down the road for these pupils. So I think all of those aspects, all of those hooks will mean that those pupils will be more excited about the changes in their school menu. But as I say, it's live. We will learn a lot of things, I think, over the next.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. The next question is about this sort of transition to horticulture. We know that we need to increase horticulture in the UK to improve food security. We import too much, we don't grow enough domestically. We're still waiting for government to release, well, the government shelved its horticulture strategy and still hasn't released a land use framework, which is supposed to be about how we can manage that and improve and make horticulture more attractive. One thing that Sustain has done is some work around peri-urban farming called fringe farming, and I'll drop some resources, because that might be useful in relation to your question, Deanna, about how we can improve, how we can, as like you start a horticultural revolution. But Ed, I'm going to come to you, because the courgette pilot included people growing veg that weren't previously growing veg. Is there any tips that you can share about how you managed to, how you managed to persuade farmers to go? I mean, it's the same, isn't it, with the peas? Like that's, you're actually taking land that's not growing veg and putting it into growing veg. Is there anything you can share with the group about how you managed to do that?
Yeah, but if you go back, well, just go back to one generation. My grandparents were farming not far between Carmarthen and Llanelli, and they'd have green crop, and they'd sell it down to the people in Llanelli and sort of parts of Swansea through a wholesaler. That's only one generation ago, and likewise, Gower was synonymous with early potatoes, veg growing. You know, when we're not talking about the 1800s here, talking 30, 40 years ago. Now, that farm is now the farm I mentioned previously is exclusively a dairy farm. So we've kind of moved from that kind of mixed farming to single-use farms, if you like. How to turn that around is going to be quite difficult. I guess the growers we have on board already are enthusiastic veg growers. Some have been sort of they've retired it, you know, that's what they do. But to kind of achieve the broader aims of trying to onshore, we do need to reach out to I guess, the more conventional farms. And we've got one grower on board now who's a dairy farmer just outside Cardiff, and she's coming on board with polytunnels, and there's all kinds of plans there on methane capture from the dairy herd to heat the polytunnel. So when you start fusing two farming methods together to say one can help the other, then and reduce your environmental impact and kind of help you manage some of the challenges of being quite a larger dairy farm, then it begins to be an attractive proposition, I feel. Well, I hope it will anyway. So it is getting out there to try and market it, and the best we can de-risk it by knowing there's a customer who will pay a guaranteed price, so the best guarantee, you know, it's good, you know, sort of the market price, and somebody who's kind of willing to invest a bit of time, energy, and money in primary production. So there's a bit of work to do then on the wider marketing piece of it to make it attractive, both financially and as an option for young farmers who might want to diversify.
Thanks very much. Anything you'd add from your the Scotland and the peas, Sarah?
I don't think so. I guess it's, yeah, in this case, the peas were already being grown. They're part of that crop rotation. So thinking about, you know, we had more of a supply and then thinking about the demand. So it's not always about, it's kind of matching those two things, what we grow, what we eat. And I think on this particular product, I said the right product at the right time in the right place, in the right market. So thinking about where those opportunities are. There may not be you know, loads of other opportunities, but I think that's my particular learning and takeaway from this.
Can I just add something to my answer there, Ruth, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess another aspect is in my native Carmarthenshire, the county council are working on one of their tenanted farms to evolve it into a horticulture sort of, well, there's, I don't know, I think it's 5 acres now. So when you have local authorities taking a bit of a lead, not only in pulling, you know, creating the demand and pulling that demand through the supply chain, but also practicing what they preach on tenanted farms, then all of that kind of gathers a little bit of momentum. It certainly gathers interest. And if farmers can see that being successful, then it's going to turn heads. So there's lots of good projects, and I'm really keen to see this one in Carmarthenshire evolve. And wouldn't it be great, you know, projects going into Carmarthenshire schools which are grown on Carmarthenshire farm, the council tenanted farms. So there are opportunities there as well, and I'm very conscious that other counties across Wales and across England and Scotland, Northern Ireland are doing similar things.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for adding the extra. Always great. Okay. We've got a question about the role of local authorities in the context of the fact that more and more are going bankrupt and facing more and more challenges. Is there any tips that you would give for councils that are in very difficult positions, and how can you sell in procurement to make sure that this is still a priority in very difficult contexts? Is there anybody that wants to take that one?
I'll start then. I'll try and keep it brief.
Thank you.
I think it's really trying to demonstrate the social value which is associated. The example I gave earlier, if we're getting frozen veg from sort of continental Europe, all of that money leaves Wales, leaves the UK economy as well. So to make a really compelling argument that for every pound you spend equates to £1.70, there's kind of different figures there, but actually you're paying a little bit more, but you're investing more as well. It is kind of taking that slightly longer term approach, which it's good to see procurement here in Wales at least moving from being very heavily biased to price to really taking into consideration what that pound spend, what it means to the to the local authority. And I think that's quite a compelling argument, especially then if we link it to, and it's easy to say, very difficult to do, if you can really find that link to, look, if you invest now, you're going to be saving quite a lot of money in the future when it comes to health problems, well-being problems, and so on and so forth. But I guess if you are controlling the budget of a local authority, you need to make changes for the very short term. So I can see there's a bit of a challenge there, but certainly take that kind of holistic view, because it does pay dividends in the longer term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did Sarah or Anda want to come in?
I can go ahead just briefly to say really recognize the challenges that local authorities are facing, and the wider public sector as well. It's really difficult to keep an eye on procurement when there's some really difficult decisions being made in local authorities. There could be some support from ring fencing budgets around food procurement. There could also be additional funding for organic or for certain types of farm assurance schemes for meat, for example. So there are some opportunities there, perhaps. But as I say, affordability is a really complex issue. But it is about what are we spending now versus what will we have to spend in the future if we don't make these changes across the board.
Absolutely, thank you.
Right, so I think the carbon tunnel vision that I'm talking about, that is because that's really the objective that we have within the climate team. I think with food, it's not a statutory obligatory recording thing, but there's a lot of things that a lot of emissions that we can be recorded. So that's the plus for the climate teams. Just doing small changes to school menus that can go towards your climate action plans. And I will say that's one selling point. Well, I also work with the economic development team because they're very keen to provide that support to small businesses around Hackney or around the vicinity, because that provides the economy, the local economy. So I would say the climate and the economy are good points to discuss. There's nothing you can do really if they're going bankrupt, because the heads will be about to explode about everything that they have to change. But if I will say not all the councils are like that. They're not all going to go bankrupt. It's a huge number. They're very worried about it. And I'm still able to talk about the climate reductions and the support that we can offer to economic development around the area.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, the last question before we move to reflections and wrapping up is somebody asked a question about what you do if your council is not run, the government, if the local authority doesn't run the catering, and it's either private contract caterers or individual schools run their own catering, which I know is the case in Hackney. Would anybody like to comment on how the council or the community can engage to get good procurement in those situations?
Me too quickly. I don't think I really explained well so Hackney doesn't procure the school meals, and I think some people think we're crazy that we're trying to influence that because it's that amount of work. We did a baseline survey around schools to see how they buy it, what they have in-house catering contractors, what they thought of the London Food Purchasing Commitment to increase climate friendly, and I was quite surprised to say that 70% said that in principle they were supportive of that. They wanted more information. Because we don't procure it, we have now we are arranging a framework, a school catering framework, with procurement in close relation with some schools. Basically, that framework is we're not going to manage it, but we're going to filter we're going to like veto the catering services that we think are the best value for you, and you can come into the framework, but we won't be delivering. So we're doing the procurement process. But then the schools take it and cherry pick the catering contracts that we think fall within our values and our contract specifications. And we're in the process of launching that by next year.
That's absolutely amazing, Amanda. Any other tips from anyone else or any comments?
Yeah, I would just say that Food for Life Served Here is that UK-wide certification scheme. So that's another framework that can offer a really holistic view of catering. So for contract caterers, it's not just for local authorities, and it's not just in school meals. So it's kind of across the piece. So that can provide a good baseline for looking not just at one aspect or another aspect, but really seeing that as a whole picture.
Yeah. Also, if I can use chair's privilege, my tips would be, well, you first of all do what Amanda did and find out who is doing the catering. So do a survey or something. It's normally publicly available, that, or you can check with the council. And then one option is that even if you have different companies, you might have the same supplier. So if you have Castell Howell and they're supplying the various, for example, and they're supplying a number of different companies that are doing the catering, you can talk to the supplier, and then you've kind of cut out the middle person and gone straight to the person that's actually doing the buying and is the wheels. So that's an option. I would also say, even if you're in the middle of a contract with a company over which the council has no control, they're still often very up for having a conversation about good procurement, because they want to maintain good relationships with the school. They know this is an issue and they want to maintain the contracts. The procurement contracts are worth millions of pounds. They're really valuable to companies. So don't be afraid to be pushy and ask for better standards, even if you're in the middle of a contract, because they want to keep the contract next time. They're going to be thinking about when that gets up for renewal. And many of these companies have got commitments to net zero and commitments to good catering. So you can hold them to those commitments. They're all in their corporate responsibility documents that will be sitting on their website somewhere. Drag them up and hold them to account. There also are a few cases of where councils have brought procurement back in-house with, successfully, and saved money. So that is an option. It's more complicated, but it can be done. So perhaps for a future webinar, Lauren, but that is possible. So don't rule it out. All right, let's move to reflections. Thanks everybody for being here. As I said at the beginning, this is a really important time for talking about procurement. It's a very live political issue, and we've got, through the Bridging the Gap project, we've got live pilots which are actually finding practical solutions that will bridge those gaps, but by making agroecological food affordable in the procurement sector. So I'd like to come to each of you in turn and just ask you to say anything that you particularly want anybody to go away with, and anybody that you think anything that you think should be the priority for us to consider in the next 12 to 18 months in the run up, well, 6 months in the run up to an election. Would anybody like to go first? If not, I'll come to you in order of speak. So you and okay, go for it. Thanks.
Right, I did not have time to prep for that. I will say for local authorities, don't wait to have everything right. We're in a climate emergency. We are going to do things without having all the full evidence to do them. Work with your schools. A lot of schools are willing to be to support them through a climate friendly, but they do need some support with this community engagement, tasting days, and they're very keen to work. So you can cherry pick the ones that are actually easiest to work with in order to refine those no mistake, but lessons learned for future contracts. Because 6 years before that, I guess that Paris Agreement 1.5 degree. So we need to ensure that we instill that, we talk about it, that it's not a project that we're going to do in one day. It's going to take some time, and don't get it all 100% right. Just start the work. Yeah, and I guess I would have done a better reflection if one was sick. But yeah, and eat more lentils.
Oh, it's brilliant. Thank you. Ed, would you like to come in next?
Yeah, thank you. As I think as Sarah mentioned earlier, agriculture has devolved in Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So I guess, my reflections for today might, I guess my mantra would be, try something, albeit on a small scale. If it's only 500 kilos of something, then you really don't know where that journey takes you, but be prepared to be kind of entrepreneurial with it. It doesn't need to cost a lot of money, but initially at least, but give something a go, because nothing's going to happen by writing and reading reports. It's got to actually happen, and you've got to get the right people the best you can, and then taking everybody on that kind of journey with you, if that's possible. So I guess my closing remarks would be, if you've got a good idea and you think it's going to work, then as long as it's not going to be too much risk for anybody, then give it a go, and you'll be surprised where it might take you.
Great, thank you so much. Great. Sarah, over to you.
I think both of those are really great takeaways, and to not wait for perfect, and to give things a try, not have preconceived ideas about what kids are going to like, what they aren't going to like, and kind of work together, I think is probably the biggest takeaway for me, is to support and work together. So there are some amazing caterers out there, there's amazing wholesalers out there, there's amazing procurement teams out there, and bringing them together around an idea, whether that's one product or a slew of products as you've got going in Wales, and kind of figuring out how it's going to work together. I think.
Thank you very much. I just want to, before we close, I'd just like to remind you that if you're not signed up to the newsletter already, please do so, because that's how we'll be sharing all of the results of the pilots and giving all the kind of advice about how you can learn from those, and what the next steps are for bridging the gap. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much to our panelists. It's been enlightening for me. You think you work in something for ages, and still having sessions like this really, yeah, it's inspiring, and it's also, I've learned so much. So a huge thank you.